Ralph Perico. Rocha's story begins far from the world of federal indictments and cartel negotiations. It begins in the working-class streets of Norwalk, California, a place where neighborhoods carried their own identity, their own colors, and their own history of loyalty and bloodshed. For Rocha, Norwalk wasn't just home. It was the training ground that shaped him long before he learned how to manipulate gangs, cartels, and the U.S. government itself. As a teenager, he gravitated toward the Barrio Norwalk gang, one of the many barrios feeding young men into a cycle of violence, incarceration, and street fame. To Rocha, the gang offered structure, belonging, and a sense of power he never felt anywhere else. What began as small-time fights and neighborhood rivalries slowly escalated into a reputation for fearlessness, qualities that would draw the attention of a far more dangerous organization. That organization was La M, the Mexican Mafia, one of the most powerful and secretive prison gangs in the United States. Emerging from the California prison system in the late 1950s, the Mexican Mafia built its empire through extortion, narcotics taxation, and absolute control over Hispanic gang members behind bars. But power inside prison meant power on the streets as well. By the time Rocha came of age, La M had already perfected a structure in which one shot caller inside could control hundreds outside. Rocha understood that joining the Mexican Mafia was not a matter of signing up. It was a lifelong commitment sealed by blood, loyalty, and violence. Over time, he earned trust through the currency La M valued above all else: obedience, aggression, and results. He wasn't just another street-level soldier. He was becoming someone who could move weight, enforce taxes, and maintain discipline in neighborhoods claimed by the Mexican Mafia. For nearly 2 decades, Rocha operated in the shadowy intersection between prison politics and street operations. He learned the internal hierarchy of La M, the authority of made members, the influence of associates, and the rigid, often brutal enforcement of rules. Prison stints only deepened his loyalty. Every time he went inside, he became more ingrained, more respected, more connected. Rocha mastered the art of survival, not by brute strength alone, but by navigating alliances, reading people, and understanding how to remain useful. Power inside the Mexican Mafia depended on relevance. As long as Rocha generated money, influence, and fear, his position was secure. But no member of La M operates without the risk of drawing law enforcement attention. For Rocha, that attention arrived in the form of a federal racketeering indictment, the kind designed to dismantle entire criminal networks. He served his time, but prison did not weaken his ambition. It sharpened it. When he walked out in 2007, he believed the streets still owed him something. He saw a map of narcotics markets in La Puente and Norwalk that he believed should belong to him. Instead of lying low, he moved quickly and aggressively, attempting to seize control of territory that had been in flux while he was incarcerated. But every move he made disrupted existing alliances and threatened those who already held power. And in the world of La M, challenging another member without permission can be a death sentence. The man whose authority Rocha disrupted was Jaco Padilla, a longtime MA affiliate with deep influence and a network loyal to him. Padilla viewed Rocha's return not as the reemergence of an ally, but as the arrival of a rival. What followed was not just a disagreement, it was a full-scale turf war. Rocha pressed forward with ambition, pushing his people into neighborhoods Padilla considered his own. Padilla responded the way high-ranking gang members have responded for decades, with violence. In late 2007, Padilla's wife and associates were swept up in a case alleging they conspired to murder Rocha and another gang member aligned with him. The indictment suggested the seriousness of the conflict. Padilla didn't want Rocha intimidated or pushed out. He wanted him gone permanently. The assassination attempt came swiftly. Rocha was shot, an ambush designed to eliminate him before he could secure his power base. Yet he survived, and surviving only fueled his determination. The shooting made him paranoid, angry, and more aggressive. It also marked the moment when the Mexican Mafia began to fracture around him. He was no longer moving in harmony with the organization. He was clashing with it. And when internal gang politics collide with personal ambition, the fallout is often catastrophic. Rocha's response to the attempted murder was not retreat. Instead, he turned to what he knew best: extortion, intimidation, and control. His operations expanded into a large-scale extortion scheme, targeting drug dealers, businesses, and anyone operating within territories he believed he ruled. He collected taxes in the name of La M, even as his standing within the organization remained uncertain. And while his enemies plotted, law enforcement had begun taking a deeper interest in the chaos surrounding him. By 2009, federal agents had gathered enough evidence to arrest him on charges that carried the possibility of life in prison. This moment, the fall, the arrest, the confrontation with federal prosecutors, marks the turning point of Rocha's story. The man who had risen through La M by force, loyalty, and fear now faced the reality that his past could bury him forever. But unlike many gang members cornered by the federal government, Rocha saw an opportunity hidden within the crisis. Rather than choose loyalty to the Mexican Mafia, rather than face a lifetime behind bars, he made a decision that would transform him from a feared gang member into one of the most controversial informants in modern California criminal history. The arrest of Ralph Perico Rocha in 2009 marked the moment when every world he belonged to, La AIM, the streets, and law enforcement, began converging into one long, unpredictable spiral. By the time federal agents confronted him, they had assembled a detailed portrait of a man who was no longer operating as a disciplined member of the Mexican Mafia, but as a rogue power broker. Surveillance, confidential informants, and intercepted communications painted Rocha as the architect of a sprawling extortion network that touched drug dealers, independent operators, and anyone moving narcotics within areas he claimed as his own. What once resembled a typical taxation system enforced by the Mexican Mafia had become something larger, more chaotic, and far more personal. Rocha was no longer just collecting money for La M. He was building a criminal enterprise that operated almost entirely under his command. Federal investigators made their move quickly. Rocha was arrested in 2009 and brought face to face with the very charges that could bury him for the rest of his life: racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, violent crimes in aid of racketeering. The types of charges that come stacked, heavy, and unyielding. Prosecutors told him plainly he was looking at a potential life sentence if he fought the case. And they had enough evidence, wiretaps, surveillance, witness statements, to make that sentence a realistic outcome. For the first time in years, Rocha found himself powerless. The bravado that had kept him alive through turf wars and assassination attempts meant nothing in a federal building surrounded by agents who had been tracking him for years. But in that powerless moment, Rocha saw his opening. He had always been a man who understood leverage, understood how to manipulate fear and opportunity. Now he recognized that the government was offering him a lifeline, a chance to walk away from the weight of a federal indictment in exchange for something far more dangerous than prison time. They wanted information. They wanted access to the Mexican Mafia's networks. They wanted someone who could open doors that no undercover agent could dream of reaching alone. And Rocha, facing a lifetime behind bars, accepted. It was a decision not just to cooperate, but to reinvent himself. Yet, even as Rocha entered into a confidential informant agreement with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, a darker cloud hung over him, one that would complicate every step of the government's plan. For years, homicide detectives had quietly suspected Rocha of being involved in, or at least ordering, the 2009 murder of Lucio Rodart. Rodart's body had been found in chilling condition, blindfolded, gagged, handcuffed, shot twice in the head. It was the signature of an execution, and whispers throughout the criminal underworld pointed toward Rocha. The motive? Control, discipline, fear, tools Rocha used as naturally as language itself. But proving the killing was a challenge. Witnesses were scared, reluctant, or dead. Without solid evidence, detectives could never fully charge Rocha. Still, the case lingered, shadowing his new life as an informant. ATF agents recruited him to infiltrate La M and cartel circles, while other investigators continued working the murder case, often without knowing that Rocha was being protected by a federal agency. It created internal conflict. One branch of law enforcement viewed Rocha as a tool. Another saw him as a killer trying to dodge justice. Rocha, for his part, leaned into the chaos. He fed the ATF stories, intelligence, names, and routes, some accurate, others exaggerated, and some entirely self-serving. His ability to influence multiple worlds didn't end with his arrest. It simply shifted. Now, instead of manipulating street networks, he was manipulating government agencies. The ATF, convinced they had secured a rare asset, overlooked warnings from other investigators who doubted Rocha's loyalty. In the world of informants, usefulness often outweighs truth, and Rocha understood that better than anyone. As Rocha's cooperation deepened, so did his entanglement with high-level criminal negotiations. The ATF encouraged him to pursue contacts with Mexican cartels. They wanted insight into the drug pipelines stretching from Mexico into California. They wanted an informant who could sit across the table from cartel figures without flinching. Rocha fit that profile perfectly. He knew the world of violence. He understood its codes. And he carried the kind of reputation that made cartel leaders listen. But before Rocha could fully step into the next stage of cooperation, he needed to convince everyone around him, cartel members, IME associates, and even government agents, that he was still the same Perico who had commanded fear and respect for years. He crafted a persona that allowed him to move seamlessly between law enforcement and the criminal underworld. He presented himself as a man still hungry for influence, still committed to La M, still willing to push weight and control territory. And many believed him. In this transitional period, Rocha's double life grew increasingly complex. He was working with the ATF while maintaining contact with gang members who assumed he was building his next criminal venture. He was meeting with federal agents during the day and reconnecting with cartel intermediaries at night. Every conversation he had, every move he made carried mortal risk. If La M discovered he was cooperating, they would kill him. If the cartel suspected betrayal, they would kill him. If the ATF learned he was withholding information or manipulating them, they would abandon him to whichever gang reached him first. But perhaps the most dangerous element of all was the murder case lingering over him. Though Rocha was never charged, detectives refused to let it go. Their pursuit kept pressure on the ATF and disrupted the smooth narrative federal agents hoped to build around their star informant. It was a reminder that Rocha was not a clean asset. He was a man in the middle of overlapping criminal and investigative worlds. And in time, these overlapping worlds would collide violently. By the time Ralph Perico Rocha fully stepped into his role as a federal informant, he had already mastered the art of becoming whatever people needed him to be. To the ATF, he presented himself as a cooperative asset desperate for a second chance. To his associates on the street, he acted like a man preparing to re-establish influence after surviving assassination attempts and prison politics. And to the cartel emissaries watching him closely, he appeared to be a trusted representative of the Mexican Mafia, someone capable of bridging the gap between the drug lords of Mexico and the prison power brokers of California. This shape-shifting quality was not new for Rocha. It had been the defining trait of his survival in La M. But now, for the first time, the stakes were exponentially higher. Every lie he told, every role he played, carried a death sentence if exposed. The federal government believed it had secured a rare opportunity, a cooperating witness with the pedigree, connections, and credibility to reach deep into the operations of the La Familia Michoacana cartel. At the time, La Familia was one of the most violent and rapidly expanding criminal organizations in Mexico, known for its pseudo-religious ideology and its attempts to control methamphetamine distribution across the United States. What the ATF needed was someone who could get close enough to the cartel's leadership to gather intelligence that traditional undercover agents could never obtain. Rocha became that bridge. He had already proven himself capable of navigating the blurred lines between street life and high-level criminal networks. Now he was being asked to infiltrate one of the most dangerous cartels in Mexico, not through deception alone, but by using his authentic reputation as a genuine gangster. In 2011, Rocha took the first steps of this volatile assignment. Under ATF supervision, he traveled to Mexico to meet with cartel representatives who believed La M was interested in forming a partnership. The cartel's offer was bold, lucrative, and deadly in its implications. They wanted to supply the Mexican Mafia with an enormous pipeline of methamphetamine, flooding Southern California with product in exchange for something money alone couldn't buy: protection for their leaders inside U.S. prisons. This was the kind of offer that, if real, could transform the balance of power in both countries. For the cartel, it meant safeguarding their incarcerated leadership and expanding into new markets. For La M, it promised astronomical profits, expanded territory, and a formal alliance with one of Mexico's most ruthless organizations. Rocha went into the meetings wearing a wire. Every conversation, every promise, every negotiation was captured on hidden recording devices. His handlers listened as he smiled, nodded, and spoke the language of criminals. He discussed quantities, routes, prices, and the possibility of shielding cartel figures from violence behind bars. The recordings were invaluable. They revealed the cartel's ambitions, their operational structure, and their willingness to collaborate with American prison gangs. But the most extraordinary part of Rocha's undercover work wasn't what the cartel said. It was how convincingly Rocha played his role. His voice carried familiarity, authority, and a sense of belonging. To the cartel, he sounded like a man steeped in La M politics, capable of influencing decisions at the highest levels. And in truth, Rocha had once held that influence. The recordings show a man slipping effortlessly back into the identity he had cultivated for 2 decades, an identity built on violence, respect, and the promise of power. Yet while Rocha recorded the cartel, he was also recording someone else, his own federal handlers. Without their knowledge, Rocha carried a separate set of devices, capturing private conversations, complaints, frustrations, and even his personal opinions about the agents he worked with. These secret tapes would later expose a pattern of manipulation that set Rocha apart from other informants. Most cooperating witnesses lie selectively. They exaggerate, omit, or tailor their stories for personal gain. But Rocha went further. He built a parallel archive, collecting leverage against the very people who were trying to control him. On these tapes, he spoke openly about his distrust of federal agents, mocking their understanding of gang culture, and hinting at his belief that he was outsmarting them at every turn. The recordings also revealed something deeper. Rocha never fully abandoned the criminal mindset. Even while working as an informant, he viewed everyone, gang members, cartel figures, and federal agents, as pieces on a board he was determined to manipulate. Meanwhile, the ATF, unaware that their star witness was secretly gathering evidence against them as well, intensively cultivated his cooperation. Payments flowed quickly and consistently. By this stage in the investigation, Rocha was earning large sums of government money, eventually totaling nearly $500,000 for his role in the undercover operation. The more access he provided, the more the government paid. And the more the government paid, the more Rocha understood the power he held. What began as a desperate attempt to avoid a life sentence had transformed into a lucrative, dual existence. He was a gangster, collecting criminal intelligence, and an informant collecting government money, often simultaneously. As Rocha's negotiations with La Familia continued, the ATF prepared for the final phase of their operation, the federal indictments. Throughout 2011 and 2012, Rocha delivered hours of recordings, detailed intelligence, and first-hand accounts of cartel promises. Federal prosecutors built a sweeping case targeting not only cartel figures, but also Mexican Mafia members implicated in the proposed alliance. In 2013, the indictments were unsealed. More than a dozen defendants faced serious federal charges, and Rocha's work was cited as foundational to the investigation. On the surface, it appeared to be one of the most successful, informant-driven cases in recent California history. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Rocha's credibility was fragile, his loyalties questionable, and his secret recordings, if they ever surfaced, would reveal a man who was not simply helping the government, but actively manipulating it. Meanwhile, the murder case involving Lucio Rodart remained unresolved, creating unease among prosecutors who needed Rocha to appear trustworthy. And even as indictments moved forward, some investigators privately questioned whether Rocha had provided information to protect himself or to eliminate rivals within La M. This tension only intensified as the legal battles began. Defense attorneys attacked the government's reliance on a man who had continued committing crimes even while cooperating. They argued that Rocha was not a reformed criminal, but a self-serving manipulator whose testimony could not be trusted. They pointed to inconsistencies in his statements, to his long-standing feud with rival gang members, and to rumors that he had exploited his informant status to settle personal scores. The ATF continued to stand behind Rocha publicly, but inside closed rooms, doubts began to spread. Some agents wondered whether they had been used. Some prosecutors questioned whether their star witness was the liability they feared. And while Rocha remained outwardly cooperative, his secret recordings of federal agents captured moments of strain, suspicion, and frustration that foreshadowed the collapse that was coming.